The first time anyone noticed something unusual about Leon Mercer was during the spring semester at Oakwood Heights High School when Melissa Donovan, a junior with perfect attendance and mediocre grades, overheard him muttering about water from the sky when there ain't a cloud to be seen, while he swept the hallway outside the chemistry lab. She thought nothing of it until exactly 17 hours later when the sprinkler system malfunctioned during third period, drenching students and faculty alike despite the building's recent inspection certificate. Even then nobody connected Leon's mutterings to the event, just as nobody connected his absent-minded comment about the ground shaking on Thursday to the minor earthquake that rattled the small town of Millfield 3 days later, measuring 3.2 on the Richter scale, barely enough to knock a few books off shelves but noteworthy in a region not known for seismic activity. It wasn't until Jason Reeves, the captain of the debate team, started keeping a journal of old Leon's weird comments that patterns began to emerge, with Jason documenting the janitor's seemingly random statements alongside subsequent events that matched those statements with uncanny precision. Like the time Leon mentioned birds falling from the sky 2 days before a bizarre incident where dozens of starlings dropped dead in the school parking lot from an unexplained cause later attributed to a nearby farmer's experimental pesticide. Or when he whispered to no one in particular that the big tree will split in half tonight, mere hours before lightning struck the ancient oak that had stood on the school grounds since its founding in 1924, cleaving it perfectly down the middle as if cut by a cosmic chainsaw. From these methodical observations, Jason began to share his findings with a small circle of friends who initially mocked him but gradually developed their own fascination with the elderly janitor's peculiar gift. They approached Leon during lunch breaks or after school to ask casual questions about upcoming tests or football games, questions he would rarely answer directly but would sometimes address with cryptic remarks that later proved prophetic. His predictions were never in ways that could be used for personal gain or to cheat on exams, as they were always framed in terms vague enough to be meaningful only in retrospect but precise enough to send chills down the spines of those who had heard them once the foretold events actually transpired. Like when he told Mackenzie Walsh, the numbers will all be blue tomorrow, the day before a statistical anomaly occurred in the state lottery where all 6 winning numbers were considered cold numbers that hadn't been drawn in months. Or when he informed the anxious basketball team that victory comes from the smallest among you, before their championship game, which they won thanks to a last-second three-pointer from Danny Nichols, the shortest player on the team, who had spent most of the season on the bench. As these incidents accumulated, the students' initial amusement evolved into a profound respect mixed with an unspoken fear, for Leon never sought attention or validation, continuing his daily routines of mopping floors and changing light bulbs with the same quiet diligence he had displayed throughout his 37 years of employment at Oakwood Heights. His unassuming presence was a constant as principals and teachers came and went, his stooped figure and weathered hands betraying his 72 years while his eyes retained a peculiar clarity that seemed to look through rather than at the teenagers who now watched his every move with newfound interest. They whispered among themselves about Leon's predictions between classes and during lunch periods, their adolescent voices hushed yet urgent as they debated the source of his apparent clairvoyance, with theories ranging from government experiments to divine intervention to alien technology. Each theory was more fantastical than the last, but none able to account for the simple fact that Leon Mercer, a man with an 8th-grade education and no prior claims to psychic ability, somehow knew things before they happened with a consistency that defied statistical explanation. It might have remained a local curiosity, a high school legend to be passed down to incoming freshmen, had it not been for the incident with Principal Harrigan's heart attack, which Leon had alluded to the previous day when he placed his hand on the administrator's shoulder and said, "The ticker needs rest," with such genuine concern that even the typically dismissive Harrigan was momentarily disarmed. Not enough to cancel his racquetball game during which he collapsed on the court, survived, and upon his return to school 3 weeks later, approached Leon in the hallway to ask, point blank, "How did you know?" It was a question that echoed through the administrative offices and faculty lounge, legitimizing what had until then been dismissed as teenage superstition. It was Harrigan himself who, perhaps out of gratitude or curiosity or some combination of the two, mentioned Leon's peculiar talent to his brother-in-law Martin Sheffer during their weekly dinner, unaware that Martin produced the local morning show, Wake Up, Millfield, and was desperately seeking content to boost the program's declining ratings. That is how Leon found himself sitting uncomfortably in a faux leather chair beneath the harsh lighting of a small television studio on a Tuesday morning in April, his janitor's uniform exchanged for a borrowed sports jacket that hung loosely on his thin frame. His calloused hands were folded in his lap as the overly enthusiastic host Trisha Wellman asked him about his special gift, while makeup artists hovered just off camera, ready to powder his forehead at the first sign of perspiration. Leon, who had agreed to the appearance only after Principal Harrigan had granted him a day of paid leave, responded to Trisha's probing questions with the same soft-spoken directness he used when telling students which hallways were still wet from mopping. He made no grand claims about his abilities but simply stated, when pressed, that, "Sometimes I just know things before they happen, been that way since I was a boy," before predicting, almost as an afterthought, that the town's beloved century-old covered bridge would collapse that very afternoon despite recent renovations and perfect weather conditions. His statement prompted nervous laughter from the studio audience and a quick commercial break from the rattled producer. When the historic Millfield covered bridge did indeed collapse at 3:17 that afternoon due to previously undetected structural fatigue, with miraculously no vehicles crossing at the time, the footage of Leon's prediction was replayed on local news stations throughout the evening and uploaded to various social media platforms where it garnered hundreds of thousands of views within hours. This catapulted both Leon and Wake Up, Millfield into a spotlight neither was prepared for, with reporters from neighboring towns and then larger cities descending upon Oakwood Heights High School, camping out in the parking lot with cameras and microphones. This forced the administration to issue a formal statement asking media to respect their educational environment while simultaneously fielding calls from parents concerned about the disruption and from others eager to have their children interviewed about their experiences with the prophetic janitor. Leon continued to perform his duties with stoic determination, refusing most interviews, but occasionally stopping to make statements that sent journalists scrambling to their vehicles to investigate or report. Like his casual remark about water turning bad in the north side, which preceded the discovery of contamination in Millfield's northern reservoir by less than 48 hours. Or his comment that planes won't fly tomorrow, the day before a volcanic eruption in Iceland grounded flights across the Atlantic. His predictions were specific enough to be verified but vague enough to maintain an air of mystery around the elderly janitor who became known in headlines as the Oracle of Oakwood or the Prophetic Custodian, depending on the publication. It was perhaps inevitable that Leon's local fame would expand beyond Millfield's borders, especially after his appearance on regional news programs where his humble demeanor and accurate predictions created a compelling narrative that caught the attention of producers at larger networks. This resulted in invitations to appear on morning shows in Chicago, then New York, then finally, 6 months after his first television appearance, on Dawn with Deanna, the nation's highest-rated daytime talk show hosted by the famously skeptical Deanna Wright. Her hard-hitting interview style had reduced celebrities and politicians alike to stammering incoherence, but she found herself increasingly intrigued by Leon's straightforward responses and his apparent lack of interest in monetizing his abilities despite numerous offers from gambling syndicates, investment firms, and even government agencies seeking to harness his predictive powers. All of which he had declined with the simple explanation that knowing ain't the same as changing, a philosophy he maintained even as his predictions on national television, ranging from unexpected political resignations to natural disasters to surprising scientific discoveries, consistently materialized with remarkable accuracy. This earned him both devoted followers who treated his every word as gospel and determined debunkers who sought to expose him as a fraud but could never quite explain how an elderly janitor from a small town could have orchestrated events of global significance or accessed classified information across multiple domains of knowledge. Through it all, Leon remained essentially unchanged, returning to his janitor duties whenever he wasn't making television appearances, living in the same modest apartment he had occupied for decades. His only concession to fame was a new pair of work boots and the donation to the school's scholarship fund, his demeanor neither smug about his vindicated predictions nor defensive about the accusations of trickery. He maintained a serene detachment that some found calming and others found profoundly unsettling, particularly when he began to allude to events of increasing magnitude and consequence, like the surprise resignation of the Supreme Court Chief Justice or the sudden peace accord between nations that had been in conflict for generations. These predictions came true with the same inexorable certainty as his smaller forecasts had at Oakwood Heights, creating a sense of anticipation and dread whenever he was scheduled to appear on television. Viewership metrics broke records as millions tuned in to hear what Leon might say next, a phenomenon that reached its apex when Dawn with Deanna announced a special primetime episode featuring Leon Mercer as the sole guest, promoted with the tagline, "The prediction that will change everything," and hyped across all media platforms for weeks beforehand. This resulted in the largest television audience of the decade when Leon, now dressed in a tailored suit but still retaining his unassuming manner, sat across from Deanna right under the intense studio lights and cameras that broadcast his weathered face to screens around the world. Viewers in living rooms and sports bars and airport lounges and Times Square fell silent as Deanna, with uncharacteristic gentleness, asked him what he had come to share. Leon, his eyes reflecting something both ancient and immediate, announced that, in 1 week, on July 19th, something unbelievable will happen, something the likes of which has never been seen in human history. He continued as the studio audience held its collective breath, "People will become happy all over the world, all suffering will end, and the world will become a beautiful utopia full of peace and contentment, happening all at once on that day." His words sent a ripple of murmurs through the audience and prompted Deanna to lean forward with uncharacteristic intensity as she asked for clarification, though the broadcast ended minutes later without Leon elaborating further. This left viewers worldwide to interpret his message according to their own hopes and fears, with some prophesying a spiritual awakening, others a technological breakthrough, still others the arrival of extraterrestrial beings bearing gifts of advanced knowledge. These theories proliferated across social media and news outlets in the days that followed as humanity collectively speculated on the nature of the coming utopia. Religious leaders issued statements either embracing or rejecting Leon's prediction based on the theological frameworks. Financial markets fluctuated wildly as investors attempted to position themselves for whatever paradigm shift might occur. Governments held emergency sessions to discuss preparations for potential mass euphoria or civil unrest depending on their interpretation of the janitor's words. All while Leon himself returned to Millfield and resumed his custodial duties at Oakwood Heights, refusing all further interviews despite the journalists who continued to camp outside his apartment building. His silence only intensified the global anticipation that built with each passing day, reaching fever pitch as July 19th approached and humanity collectively held its breath for the promised transformation. They were unaware of what had transpired after the cameras stopped rolling, when Deanna Wright, her producer Sebastian, and 3 network executives had followed Leon to a small green room and pressed him for details about his prediction. Their expressions shifted from curiosity to disbelief to horror as Leon, with the same calm certainty that had characterized all his prophecies, explained the true nature of what would happen on July 19th. "You see, on July 19th our sun will suddenly and without warning supernova, and all life on Earth will be almost instantly destroyed. I wanted everybody in the world to go to bed happy and feeling good about what was going to happen that day." His statement left the small group speechless before Sebastian broke the silence with nervous laughter, suggesting that this must be a joke. His laughter died in his throat as he recognized in Leon's eyes the same unyielding certainty that had preceded every fulfilled prediction. This certainty sent the 5 of them stumbling from the room with ashen faces and racing thoughts, sworn to secrecy by network executives terrified of causing global panic yet personally convinced by everything in Leon's track record that his most terrible prophecy would come to pass just as all the others had. This conviction sent them scrambling to make arrangements in the few days remaining, calling loved ones, resolving old conflicts, fulfilling long-delayed dreams, or simply sitting in quiet contemplation of lives about to be extinguished, while maintaining public facades of normalcy as the world continued its excited countdown to utopia. And so it was that on the evening of July 18th, Deanna Wright stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her Manhattan penthouse, watching the sun descend toward the horizon as a massive red orb, its familiar disk now imbued with menace and majesty in equal measure. Her eyes burned not from its light but from tears she had shed privately over the past 6 days, tears for humanity's unfulfilled potential, for personal regrets too numerous to count, for the cosmic injustice of extinction without warning or recourse. Yet as she traced the sun's arc with her gaze, she found herself experiencing a strange sort of gratitude toward Leon and his merciful lie, for across the city and around the world, millions were going to sleep with hearts full of anticipation rather than dread, their dreams untainted by the knowledge of annihilation, their last moments on earth characterized not by terror but by hope. In this thought she found a sliver of comfort as darkness fell on what would be humanity's final night, a comfort she suspected Leon had intended all along, this janitor who had spent his life cleaning up after others and would, in his final act, spare them the mess of knowing their end was at hand. He allowed him instead to embrace the beautiful fiction of universal happiness while she and the few others burdened with truth watched the sun set one last time, its red glow a harbinger of the cosmic fire that would consume them all come morning. Yet somehow, in this knowledge, there was a peculiar peace, a shared secret between the universe and its doomed children, a reminder that even in extinction there could be dignity, even in cosmic indifference there could be human kindness, embodied in an old man's decision to let humanity's final thoughts be of utopia rather than apocalypse. As the last sliver of sun disappeared below the horizon, Diana whispered, "Thank you, Leon," words that dissipated into the gathering darkness of humanity's final night.